Yes, yes. Let me see. Should we throw the disclaimer in here? Following podcast may incite original thought, culture, sufficiency, and smarter conversations. Yes, here we are once again to shoot the podcast. We might have some kids, some students watching eventually, so I'm going to try to watch my mouth today. It's going to be very difficult. Today, we are talking about imperialism. As you can tell behind me by the flags that I have behind me, this is going to be a touchy subject for me. So I'm going to leave it to the professionals. Let's bring in right now. Who else can we bring in? Juan Riestra. That's my guy right there. That's my newfound brother. I mean, guys, think about it. What are the chances of the cacique finding a bohique? You know what I'm saying? What are the odds, brother? Brother, ¿cómo tú estás, mi hermano?
Muy bien, gracias a Dios. Muy contento de estar aquí. I'm glad to be here.
Man, thank you. Thank you so much. We also have here Brittany and Sandy. We see their shoulders.
We're kind of scrunched in together. Can you see us?
Yes, we have two more teachers there. Give yourselves a quick introduction.
Go ahead. Okay, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Sandy. I am an English teacher for, oh my God, how long have I been doing this? 15 years, something like that. And
you look like the host of Apple on the Desk.
I am the host of the Apple on the Desk, actually. We love to bring chaos into the world of education and show you what really happens. And I have Brittany here, and she's one of my awesome co-workers from the school that we teach in, which we will not mention just in case, and we're not sponsored by them. But we definitely want to give a shout out to our kiddos just in case they do get to see us. Hi, guys.
And here's our other host right there.
Here you go.
Sean Matos, the ever curious. What's going on, man?
Tranquilón. Just, as a fellow Caribbean from the Dominican Republic, I'm always interested in this subject and ready to jump into it.
I'm interested and scared. Riestra. Let's start with my first question, so you can clear it up not just for myself but for everybody out there who's watching this. Can you give us a brief, if possible, brief definition and difference between colonialism and imperialism?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. General idea. We're talking about similar things in the sense it's countries invading and conquering other countries and taking over. And that type of behavior has existed since the dawn of civilization, when the first empires began in Mesopotamia.
And we are talking like movie style, spear, weapon, troops, actually physically go take over.
Absolutely. The first empires were in Mesopotamia, in the Middle East, and they took over other countries.
He froze.
Well, hopefully we get him back real quick. All right. Well, until we get Riestra back, because tech gremlins are gonna attack us always.
It happens every episode.
I'll let me bring this in here.
I mean,
what I was able to find.
We do have a history teacher.
Well, can I throw this out first? Because you specifically might find this interesting. The etymology of colonialism and imperialism. Okay, colonialism comes from colonist, which means farmer, which leads to the practice of colonialism is usually involved in the transfer of population to a new territory where arrivals lived as permanent settlers while maintaining political allegiance to their country of origin. Okay? Which I'm going to throw it in there as of now, which we saw with Operation Bootstrap. I'm pretty sure Riestra will get into that. Okay. Imperialism comes from imperium, meaning to command. Imperialism is one country exercising power over another through settlement, sovereignty, or indirect mechanisms of control, which we can find with the Jones Act.
Right.
Also in Puerto Rico. And anything you guys, Brittany, please, you know about this a lot better than I. I really don't want to get too much into it. I'm going to be playing the shadows in and out. We see this. Everybody who's out there watching, we see this now happening in Puerto Rico as we speak. So let's get into it, exactly what it is, and then we'll take it from there. Ladies.
All right. So if I were your student, how would you explain imperialism to me?
If you're my student, I'm going to say, much like Juan was saying, it's very much that we call them the mother country.
Mother country. Okay.
They like Joey was asking, spears, swords, guns, they go and they just take over everything. They really, I want to say they just drain all of the resources because they want all of that to send back and make profit with our mother country.
Okay. So did you have a power outage, querido Luma?
Yeah, I did. Exactly. That's Luma for you.
So we're seeing one of the many ramifications of imperialism and how leaving only one thing devoted to resources can affect the fact something as simple as what we here in the United States take for granted, power, electricity, because living here in Ohio, I think I've gone through maybe 3 power outages that totaled a total. I don't think I've gone in a complete hour between the 3 of them. I haven't gone a complete hour. Wow. So I think about maybe 10, 15 minutes, the most time that I've been without power in the 5-6 years that I've lived here. So when they say you're going to have a power outage, I'm over here ready, in prime, living in Puerto Rico. I'm like, okay, so how long is that? A day and a half? And it's like 10, 15 minutes. One was as small as 6 minutes. And I'm like, are you serious?
And people still freak out.
And they're freaking out because they've gone no power for 6 minutes. I was like, just go take a walk. Go rake your leaves. Do something else besides being inside the house and you'll be fine. So
buy all the bread and milk.
Buy all the bread and milk. So I'm so happy that you're here, Mr. Riestra. I don't want to take up any more of your time. You were saying.
Yes. I think we're in the question of imperialism versus colonialism, right?
Yes, correct. That's exactly what we're at.
And yes, empires have existed since the beginning of mankind. But the term we use, well, it depends really on the circumstance and the style, but it's basically the same thing, right? Because in different times in history, they have to justify it with one way or the other. The mentality shift.
What do you mean by style? Their style of
yeah, but maybe style is not the word. I would say better. The circumstance, right? For example, during the 1500s, we have European colonialism in the Americas. Almost the entirety of the American continents, from Alaska to Argentina, all of that was either French, English, Dutch, or Portuguese, right? And that was the typical phenomenon we call now colonialism, right? The word imperialism was not coined back then.
Okay.
Because
I didn't know that. I thought that imperialism was always existed. That was something that's new to me. I didn't know it wasn't coined yet.
Yeah.
I was going to ask the same thing.
Yeah. Because I think the phenomenon needs to evolve because there's resistance and there's a difference of ideology that makes it difficult to justify. So at first you would use the justification of expanding Christianity or expanding a kingdom, right? And in the 1800s, most of these countries break free. So it's like 300 years of European countries in America. And in the 1800s, you have the ideas of the Enlightenment, you have ideas of democracy, you have also the idea of sovereignty, that every government should respond to its people. And if a government responds to its people, it should not respond to any other foreign country. In the 1800s, these ideas of the Enlightenment challenge the justification European countries had for conquering America. Plus, the American newborn countries would fight for independence. The United States, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and all of continental Spanish America and Brazil. Almost everything broke away in a matter of 15 years. And therefore, Europe claims that they have embraced these new ideas of democracy and sovereignty, of self-determination, that every country should choose its own fate. Plus, the society has become more and more secular. So it's more difficult to use religion to justify colonialism. So colonialism became a bad thing in the eyes of the educated people. So in the late 1800s, something very strange happens. In the late 1800s, European countries decide to take over Africa in a massive expansion of new empires. They couldn't use the same concept of colonialism that they use in the old days, because they won't fit the frame of ideology. They can't use Christianity as an excuse anymore. They can't use the idea of the classical kingdom just conquering other countries. They need new justification.
One question, Mr. Bolt asked, hopefully we can get you back. And I so appreciate your effort, right? Yes. If you can hear us. So you were mentioning something with the 3 G's. Can you explain that?
Yes. So the 3 G's, putting it very simply, gold, God, and glory. So the idea of expanding your Christian beliefs and making sure you spread your Protestant or Catholic or whatever you are, you got to get there before the other people do.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of that. Yeah.
So the 3 G's, gold, God, and glory, is what she says that was like spearheading the colonialism, right? Is that yes. Correct?
The way I try to explain the gold is they're not necessarily just out for physical gold. They're out to get all of those resources, because then they're going to have more power than everybody else. And then you're going to make more money because you're going to have resources that the other people don't have and they want it.
Gotcha.
That's very similar to techniques, if you want to call them, that they teach you when you study marketing.
Yes. I mean, isn't it all the same thing? Isn't it all ultimately the whole purpose? Riches?
Taking over
so that you can dominate whatever business.
Get your glory.
Get your glory. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Wow.
Riestra, where we're at? 1700s?
No, we were at 1800s.
1800s?
Late 1800s.
The tech gremlins. Guys, I really want to thank Riestra. I know it's not easy.
While Riestra works with those tech gremlins, one thing I did mention earlier, so you know how, like, you guys were saying, in a lot of cases, imperialism and colonialism is used like interchangeably. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think one is the other and they're the same. I was just commenting earlier to Riestra and Joy that I've always seen it as colonialism is the symptom or result of imperialism. So, I got my country. I decide, you know what? I want an empire. I'm going to take over Sandy's country. And I make my empire. I expand. Sandy, your country is now my colony. It would never be a colony if I never wanted an empire to begin with, So I always saw it like that. Like, one is a cause and effect.
Yeah, but now that Riestra mentioned that that concept wasn't coined until after, mm-hmm. that kind of like threw me back like, oh, wait a minute. This was not, and it was all as far as the frame of mind. Oh, no, we can't call it this. But I think it's still the same, half a dozen of one, 6 of the other, because it's still, you just call it something different because we can't call it this. So we got to call it something else, but it's still the same thing.
Sure.
Slavery is still slavery, no matter what you call it. You can call it workforce, but if you're not paying them right and not getting them a healthy environment to work in, guess what? It's still slavery.
Yeah, I feel like the concept is still there. The cause and
Yes,
effect.
I'm gonna interrupt you, John, to see what Riestra has to say because he's still battling there. Welcome. You were saying. Oh my gosh, I love you, Riestra. Juan, I love you so much. Thank you so much for. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay. I hear you a bit choppy.
Okay. We hear you.
All right.
Fine. Perfect. Come on.
Okay. You can hear me perfectly?
Perfectly.
Okay. Well, I hear everyone a bit.
Oh gosh. I'm telling you, it's okay. It's okay.
We will do a follow-up to this if we can't get it to the point where we want it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, how I know how not really know, but I can imagine how imperialism will be taught in the island. I say here on the island because I feel like I'm still on the island.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that it's taught here in the States? Like what's behind it?
In my opinion?
Yeah. That's what this is for. We're shooting the shh for a reason.
So obviously when we teach like the American Revolution, for example, when we're breaking away, do we want to
go ahead? Cresta, can you hear us now? Is that better?
Yeah, go. Yes, go ahead. Now I can hear it clearly. Go on.
Okay.
Do you want to keep going where you left off in case?
I'm curious about your thought.
Oh,
so
go ahead.
Okay, so in my opinion, like when we're teaching imperialism here, it's like, of course, I feel like we make America seem like the great. We're not really being imperialistic. We're not really conquering anything. We're just helping those people by taking them in. But of course, when we talk about like the American Revolution, we emphasize it was terrible being ruled by these people across an ocean. They have no idea what our life's like. And we just had to break away. It was the right thing to do. So I feel like what's the word I'm looking for? Hypocritical.
Mm-hmm. Hypocritical.
Very hypocritical.
So the way I remember U.S. history being presented to me, being a student here in the United States, was basically the same thing. Oh, the American Revolution was because we were under, the rule of the British, and they were no taxation without representation. That was something that I remember very, very clearly, growing up here and coming to school here.
It's because we push it.
Because it was pushed. Yeah, it was definitely pushed. And she says we because she's a history teacher, right? And that's what, that's what she's taught to do.
But paid for.
and then but when it comes to what the United States does to other countries, no, we're just helping. We're not really doing much, so they kind of like use it as a euphemism or they change the narrative just a little bit to say, no, we're not trying to take over. We're just
because aren't we as an island going pretty much through the same thing that the U.S. went through with England?
Absolutely, it's the same thing. So here's a story. Quick side. Before I go on. When I moved back to the United States and I was working in New York, there was a young man who was interested. Like, you're from Puerto Rico, but you're like from the island. I said, yeah. He goes, so I'm just looking this up. Are you seriously telling me that you guys can go to war for us? You guys can pay taxes, but you can't vote for our president? I said, yeah. That's exactly it. We don't even have a voice in the Senate. And they're like, what? So he was just trying to figure out why that was happening. Yet we have all these other things that we're obligated to do or follow through in, or have the you can join us here. You can do that, but you can't vote for our president. You don't have a voice. You don't have anything that's that's reflective of what our needs are.
That's weird. What does that sound like?
It sounds like a colony, and that's exactly what And he was like, "So, but isn't colonialism illegal?" And I was like, "So they call it a commonwealth?"
Yeah.
And that's and I think that's kind of like a segue to where these words change. So we went from colonialism to imperialism, and that's where I'd love for Juan to jump in and kind of like show us the dynamics of how that changed. As far as the perspective, people are becoming, I guess, the more educated people become, they got to switch the words around. Is that pretty much what's going on? Right when I asked the question.
I feel like kind of where he was going, he got my brain flowing. How we may have the shift from what happened in Africa, because that was just brutal.
Yeah.
Like, how can we even justify that as being colonialism? Like, it was there was nothing about it. It was terrible.
It was like
I saw two different maps. One before Britain, was it the British invasion of Africa?
Britannia,
and one now, and the maps look completely different. The way everything was separated and the countries, and it was insane how they just went in and just separated land.
Yeah, they called it the scramble for Africa, where everyone just had to get their paws on whatever they could get. And that's what it was.
Welcome, Juan. You're awesome. Riestra. So pop John back on. So it's easier to have all of us on here, and I don't feel like I have to jump on Brittany's shoulder.
All right. Man, I went into a serious rabbit hole studying on this, and I am sure we're gonna end up doing a follow-up on this, but I just wanted to see what you think about this. In 1948, President Truman, the fucker, said the era of imperialism was gone with the arrival of democracy.
That's cute. So when do you consider the arrival of democracy? Because I mean, we're talking about that with ancient Greece right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and there were countries when didn't Guam become a U.S. territory like after the World Wars?
Yep, after what was it?
I think.
World War II?
Yeah.
What about the Philippines?
In the Philippines.
No, that was Spanish American.
That was the Spanish American along with us.
Yeah, so no, that's Truman's full of shit on that one.
Mom is asking, is Mr. Riestra in Puerto Rico? Yes, he is.
That's our mama.
Yes, he is. Okay, I'm still a little. All right. Colonialism, John, you're with me on this. Colonialism is a byproduct of imperialism.
Yeah.
Right?
In my opinion, but yeah.
Aren't both things unconstitutional and illegal?
Well, I mean, what makes something constitutional or illegal just depends entirely on the ruling class and what we allow them to do.
Well, I mean, technically, whatever makes something illegal is whether or not they caught you.
Well, yeah, that too. So, I mean,
those expressed versus implied powers of the Constitution.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And plus, like, I think of examples how at one point it was illegal for Chinese people to marry Americans back when they were working on the railroad and all that.
Really?
And, yeah. And to this day, like, okay, like every minority group has gone through its racism and its whatever, but Chinese people are the only people in this country that have been forbidden from marrying other people, like literally by law, like that. And like in other examples, it's been like frowned upon, but like actual straight up law that you can't become a citizen, you can't marry an American because you're X race. That only has happened to Chinese people. So
John,
like it just depends.
As far as John Wayne, that's asking right there. I'm not sure if it was with the invasions of the Americans that we went from Borinquen to Puerto Rico. I think that changing the name happened beforehand, but
Yeah, that was from Columbus. Columbus was the one that changed it to Puerto Rico, the rich port.
It makes sense. It makes sense that the
Yeah,
Spaniards are the
because
ones
it
that
was
called
it
that.
was the Spanish that came and colonized, and it when they pointed to, I mean, there's still, like, I think from what I understand, there's still speculation. If Riestra can hear us and gets to jump back, he can like probably help us a little bit more. But from what I
Guys who are watching, if we cannot, you know what, whether we can or we cannot get Riestra back, we will be doing a follow-up on this.
I
Believe
think so,
that.
yes. I think
Believe
so.
that.
So
I have 1,001 questions still.
yeah. So what I was saying was that from what I understand, when the Spaniards asked the natives, ¿verdad? Our ancestors, the Taínos, you know, what's the name of that place? They pointed and they said, what is it?
Aubao Moin means
Yes,
bloody island.
Aubao, which is Bloody Island. That's what basically is called. But when they looked at each other, you know, they called themselves Taino as a people of peace. That's what that means. And they pointed to elsewhere. They're like Borinquen, you know, Borinquen. So that's what everyone called it. And we still, and I believe the Borinquen say, because there are a lot of words that the Tainos use that we just know it as this because that's what everyone called it. That's still stuck. Like ají is definitely a Taino word. I didn't know that. I'm trying to learn Taino, guys. Okay, and the English language arts teacher is trying to learn the native language, and I'm having a hell of a time, but it's worth it.
My two favorite examples of that is huracán, hurricane, and barbacoa, barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
They
Macana, maca, all of these are
Taino
all
words.
of these are Taino words. But they have their language. They did have their grammar to it. They did have their, you know. So as simple as it was, it still is a language. And there's a small group of people that are steadily trying to keep it alive. And so I'm part of that group. I'm trying to learn because it's important to know, you know, to try to at least try to reclaim the language. Like you guys know how I am with language. For me, language is the manifestation of humanity. It's what we created, what we have, what keeps us together, and how we move on. So yeah, it can't die, not when we have as many people trying to bring it back as best as we can. So yeah, as far as Borinquen to Puerto Rico, that's just the Taínos call it Boriquen, and which is why we're Boricanos. But the Spaniards called it Richport because that's what they saw, riches.
You know what? It's going to be very interesting when we're finally able to get Mr. Figueroa, the former head of the ceremonial park in Ponce, the Taino ceremonial park in Ponce, because apparently what we all understand as Taino, that's not what we're called. We're actually coming from Igneris.
The Ignace, the Ignace, yeah. We there are actually different eras of the native indigenous tribes before the Taínos. Taínos was the one that we're more familiar with because it was the more recent ones, the ones that got annihilated before the Spaniards. But there were at least 3 other tribes, not tribes.
But what I understood, Taino is pretty much a word that came up due to the lack of vocabulary to explain exactly what the hell they were.
Right. Yes.
Really cool. And there was a lot of different tribes that would meet in Ponce. I always thought Ponce was like one of their villages, and it's not. It was a meeting point.
Yeah, it was a hub.
Yeah, it's like a party plaza.
It was the farmers market.
Come in and
it was the farmers market where everybody would come and trade.
They have necklaces and little things of jewelry that don't even exist anywhere in the Caribbean. Like those stones don't exist in the Caribbean, so they must have come from the northeast of South America. I forgot which part that would be right now.
That reminds me of a rabbit hole I fell in accidentally one day of like pre-Incan empires. So everybody talks about the Aztecs and the Incas, but they were, people before that, and in a lot of cases, people that like laid the foundation to what we know now. And it just makes me wonder how that applies to the Dominican Republic. What were like our pre-Taino people? Because I never even thought of that or heard of it.
So from what I understand,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What I was going to say, from what I understand, our history is not much different from yours. They just crossed the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Our history is not much. The only difference between Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, the Barbados, the Bahamas, all of those places is the ratio of salt and pepper and brown sugar. I mean, because honestly, that's it. That's it. That's
you can talk about the Revolutionary Wars in Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, all these islands, and it's, if I'm not mistaken, there's a point in time where they're not separate. It's all the same fight. The only thing is those battles are on different fronts, and those different fronts happen to be on different islands with their own different, identities, but we have so much in common. We're all cousins and brothers.
Yeah.
So your history, my history, my boy Cliff's history, which he's Haitian, the Buju Banton's history, who's Jamaican. It's all the same. It's still one Caribbean.
Yeah.
Which is what Che was about, which is really, though people want to bash him, and we'll probably hear about this in the comments later on, that's what Fidel Castro originally was about. One Caribbean. Well, why is he fighting in Cuba? Well, because you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Simon Bolivar had more or less the same idea.
You have to start somewhere. I think we spoke about this in one of the other podcasts. How come we didn't have more people from the Dominican Republic, more people from Cuba coming in and helping us fight in Puerto Rico? Well, simple, because they didn't want it to look like it was a Cuban invasion.
Mm-hmm.
If we started it ourselves, and then they come in, now they're allies.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So and the island, unfortunately, has that wasn't the first time that they've seen something like that. We learned with Mr. Figueroa himself that Puerto Rico was already at war before the Spaniards got there, and they were losing.
With like what, intertribal fights or
the Caribes? Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So here goes a philosophical question, right? Is it human nature?
I love question.
Look, I haven't had my glass of wine yet. Okay, we're running on 13 hours of high gear. We've had a hell of a day.
What's your falafel question?
My falafel, fuck you. I dropped the F-bomb, so you got to cut that out in the class. But they've heard me cuss before, so never mind. So anyway, is it just human nature? Do you guys think that it's just human nature to fight, or to try to? Because think about it. There's an emergency. There's a storm coming, hurricane or the pandemic, and people went crazy for toilet paper because they thought it was an important resource, and they were fighting over that resource until there was nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
You saw that reaction. So what is it? You have something that
I don't think something like that specifically is human nature, wanting to fight, wanting to bicker over something. I think something like the toilet paper, and people might call me a pig for it. You can kiss my rear end with or without toilet paper. Is more in education.
Well,
there's a plant called the toilet paper plant.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's safe on the bottom, and it has anti-something properties and whatever. So it's almost like a medicinal wipe.
Mm-hmm.
So I think stuff like that was just in education on part of the consumer. But then again, if you think about it, if you're in marketing, you don't want your consumer to be smart.
Yeah. Because
if he's smart, he might not buy your stuff.
If you're in colonialism or if you're in imperialism, you don't want the people that you're hey, the lights are back on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, just to close off, if you're imperialism or colonialism business, then you don't want the people that you're ruling over to be educated either.
They're not going to buy your toilet paper.
Then they're not going to buy your toilet paper.
Mm.
I'm going to refill.
Well, you know what? Speaking on that about the market and people knowing, did Puerto Rico know how important sugarcane was before General Winship? I wanted to call him something other than General. General Winship took over and turned it into a monoculture.
Yes, the sugar industry was already booming before Winship arrived, and before the Spanish
At the same magnitude?
Winship arrived when the sugar industry was already here, was producing a whole lot of money, because he arrives in the 30s, Winship, and the Americans start making sugar companies the same year the invasion began, 1898, for Puerto Rico. And that's, I think, an interesting evolution of colonies, right?
So it's not a situation where the Chinese had gunpowder and invented gunpowder, but used it mainly for rockets and fireworks, and didn't realize you could make like game-changing weapons out of it. It wasn't a situation like that.
I think that the model they had closest was Haiti. And it is like the extreme of the extreme colonialism, because you have 90% of the population that's slaves. There's who are slaves, right?
Wow.
Or enslaved people. Really, 90%. That's crazy. And whites are less than 5%. And it was the richest colony in terms of what it was producing in all the Americas. So that is the extreme of colonialism, the classical European colonialism in America that they had. Spain didn't do that for Puerto Rico and for Cuba and the Dominican Republic, because those islands were considered more strategic, militarized islands. So France, England, and Britain started proving the model that they thought could function the best, which is a colony is meant to produce for the colonizer. In Spanish, there's a word called metropolis. The metropolis is the counterpart of the colony. The metropolis is the European, the country,
the mother country, like Brittany said, right? Yeah,
absolutely. So, and that was also a step of evolution of colonialism in America in itself, because at first colonialism would be settlers, right? People that move to a place. If people move to the moon, for example, we made a Cuban colony in the moon, an American colony in the moon, or a Russian colony in the moon, it would be just people living there, right? But then it did not necessarily have the implication that the ones that lived there were treated inferior to the ones that stayed, that did not make the trek to the newly discovered land, right, or conquered land. But during the 1700s, the model was to exploit the possession. They say you're a possession.
I'm sorry. So the way colonialism is used doesn't necessarily mean that it is its core ideology.
No, the ideology changes. I think colonialism deep down, what we're seeing is human greed. It's a desire a perverse desire to take advantage of other people. The ideology changes because it's always a twisted ideology that is always challenged by philosophy or by rebellion, right? So they constantly need to justify that desire with something else, right? It's a bit Freudian, right? Freud is believed to have said that we are driven by desires and then we use reason to justify it, right? Yeah. There's a little bit of that. There's appetites to conquer, twisted appetites, and it changes throughout time, right? That's why imperialism as a term, the age of imperialism, is super interesting because it blows my mind to see how close it is to the classical colonialism. Classical colonialism is from the 1500s to the 1800s. By the 1820s, Brazil is independent. The United States is independence. All of Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, all of those countries accomplished independence in the 1820s. Plus, Europe has just finished the Napoleonic Wars. It's experimenting with democracies. So there's an idea that we have improved as a civilization. And we're like, no, we're now a group of people that have learned from that primitive desire of conquering. And we're more about creating governments for the people, right? And nationalism and all that made it.
And commerce, right?
Yeah, and commerce and trade, just freedom. And so Europeans started to feel proud about themselves that they had surpassed that. They abolished slavery. They were saying we abolished slavery. So that means we are more humane civilization, right?
Okay, wait, go back. You said they were saying, not that they were doing, they were saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to throw that in there. Okay.
Yeah. Because only a few years later, in the late 19th century, very late 19th century, in the 1880s, 1890s, and up to the 1910s, those 30 years, Europeans desire and conquered all of Africa except for Ethiopia, right? And that is breathtaking. It is mind blowing because it's an entire continent in only a couple of decades. It's like, what the hell is happening here? That's one thing that's strange. The other thing is strange. It's the same European civilization that had just come out clean, saying, "Hey, I'm not into those bad habits. I have surpassed those bad habits," and they go back and do it again. Thirdly, it's countries that are closer to Europe than America itself. You know, it would make more sense for Europeans to conquer Africa first before crossing the Atlantic. So Africa has been there for a long time. And I think it's a very important example, the change from classical colonialism to the age of imperialism, how they call it, the age of imperialism, because it shows you how easy it is to believe that we have surpassed it and how easy it is to manipulate people to justify a new style of it, doing the same thing, but just changing the justification. And that age of imperialism, I think, has two very important aspects that were not that strong during the classical age of colonialism. One is industrialization. Industrialization, yes, it made all these European countries have two things stronger than before. One is a desire, because they want raw materials and they want markets, they want to sell the things. Now they're selling more than what they actually need to sell, because they're producing so much that they have already made enough shirts for everyone or enough food for everyone in Europe. And now they're trying to say, who do we sell it to? Instead of saying, let's work on our own problems. They're trying to see, where can I find markets, right? They want people to work for them, people to buy their products, and also raw material. So that's the want. That explains the want. The other thing is,
so they already had a surplus, but they're still looking for material to continue to make the same things that they already have a surplus of. Yeah, that's real brilliant.
In order to sell it to more people. So at this time, they're just so they're still so hyped up about the concept of market and everything of capitalism, that when they see China, there's like, oh my God, this country is so full of people. It's so such a large population. Just think about how rich we can become selling things to them, whatever it is, right? India, the same thing, right? So this new age of imperialism has a lot to do with industrialization and capitalism, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is,
because when I studied marketing and micro business, they're like the best thing, the most important thing in marketing is not as far as filling a need with your product, create a need with whatever product you have.
Absolutely.
So what other way of creating a need than taking away everything that a people have. And you see, this is, man.
Yeah,
I knew this was going.
And if I can interject, if I can interject super quick, this is just bringing me horrible flashbacks from this book I read, The Open Veins of Latin America.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God! Like it's a historical book. It's talking about it just like Riestra's talking about it. They're talking about it historically, like a teacher would, right? And I'm reading this and I'm tearing up, and I'm reading this like it's a novel and shit, and I'm like, this really happened? Like just the exploitation and the taking of the raw materials and just screwing over farmers and natives and shit. It was
going back to what teachers do, this is why we have history teachers, so that we can make sure that we understand what happened.
You want to have a bad day and mess up your mood?
Yeah, go ahead and read that one, against War Against All Puerto Ricans. Yeah,
okay.
It's historical. It's not historical fiction. This is truth, right? It's what it is. But that's why, you know, we have this platform, because we want to share this knowledge, and the importance of our history teachers are there so that we can remember the narrative, because I'm learning every day. I don't remember everything. But if you tell it like a story, right? People we have a natural ability to remember stories.
Yeah.
And those stories always have a moral lesson, and that rule of be careful. These warnings are here. So bringing it, you know, putting the teacher sense into it. This is why we're here, to remind us of these stories, to let us know we can't go back that path again, because look at what happened as a result of it. And I think, me personally, I think that the way we are right now, this world globally, we're at a turning point as far as humanity is concerned. We're at a turning point right now. People are waking up or realizing or questioning there's something happening. We see the division, yes. And there are forces, or there are people that see that we're waking up and are trying to keep the division. But I also see that what we're trying to do is, no. We heard this story before. Pay attention, listen, learn. And that's why we're here. That's why this platform is here. Because I have some information. Riestra has some information. John, Brittany, Joey has information. Nobody is paying us to do this, guys. You know, this is a labor of love. Because we want to make sure that everyone can hear this, as many people as we can. And we might have a small audience, but that's okay. Each one teach one. That's what teachers do, right?
Well, with this topic, I think the word love is going to be used very loosely. It's very aggravating. Riestra, I think we're at the, I'm sorry to interrupt, Riestra, we're at the late 1800s. Bring us up to date with the whole imperialism, because I would like you to touch the subject on how we're still seeing it today.
Yes,
absolutely. Okay.
I had to take a deep breath, because that's I'm going to step off camera real quick, but I'm right here. Please continue.
I'm going to jump on Brittany's shoulder.
Well, I'm going to use that example, because what blows my mind is to see how Europe embraced some very beautiful ideals. Democracy, self-determination, sovereignty, humanism, right? Absolutely. And abolishing slavery, and all men are created equal, and all that things, right? And they kind of felt that they were there. They were they supposed to be, and they were proud of that. Liberalism. Europe was becoming liberal, embracing this new waves of liberal thought, and also revolution. Sometimes it caused Europeans to rise up.
I'm sorry, could you explain liberalism? Give a small definition of liberalism, please.
Liberalism could be summarized in a way as the ideology that became common in Europe after the French Revolution, that valued individual freedom, valued democracy, valued separation of church and state, and and also economically, it did value capitalism, right? It's part of liberalism. It's part of the trend of ideology that were common late 1700s, early 1800s. And those are the progressives of the 19th century, in opposition to absolutist countries that opposed democratic reforms, wanted to keep slavery from being abolished, right? So liberalism felt like Europeans had an ideology that was helping them treat other countries better. There was anti-imperialism. Suddenly they have a desire, right? And industrialization gives them a desire. And industrialization gives them something I didn't say earlier, which is an ability of a power. The overwhelming advantages in terms of military advantages an industrialized country has over a non-industrialized country is something that is difficult to understate. It's overwhelming. Troops have factories are making guns that equip every single soldier, and everything is just like a machine, right? So it's the situation in which you can do something and you want to do something, and the only thing that's holding you is your conscience. You know it's wrong because the Enlightenment and all this humanism has made Europeans realize that this is wrong. It was easier to follow the conscience when it wasn't that easy to conquer other people, but now it's easier for them, and they have a desire, this appetite, this selfish appetite to conquer other countries. So it is amazing how to see in such a short amount of time.
At the time, were these countries running by one person, or was it already governments together making the decisions?
These were individual governments, but they could also coordinate among themselves. Because there's another thing they were valuing: peace. European countries were at peace. After the Napoleonic Wars, there was decades of relative peace. So they also felt highly civilized, that they were not into primitive warfare anymore, right? And suddenly they found an ideology to justify the conquest. It can't be religious anymore because in the 1800s, people are much more secular. It can't be, I want to take over these countries because I'm more powerful. That won't work because there's the idea of self-determination and all that. And they use two things that were very popular, and they bend it to their desires, to serve their desires. One is the concept of civilization, okay, which I think it's a very useful concept to explain. Yes, absolutely. Yes. They use it in a way to say that we are civilized and they're not, right? It is a useful concept historically because it helps you identify differences between cultures and different degrees, but it has been so poisoned by ideology that sometimes we have to be very careful in how we use it, because back then they would say a civilized nation is doing a favor to those countries that are not civilized by conquering them. They would say African countries are so primitive that they're killing each other, and even if we attack and conquer, the amount of Africans that will die will be less because it will be a short period of time of the conquest compared to the amount of lives we're going to save by stopping this.
Saving them by killing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the irony. This is another irony. Some African countries still had slavery. And Europeans had just abolished slavery, and they're like, we're superior because we don't have slavery, you do. So I need to invade you in order to abolish slavery. That's what Belgium, which is a very small country in Europe compared to most other countries, Belgium conquered Congo and had like 10 million people died during the conquest. This is the 1800s. 10 million people died. Okay.
So wait a minute. This was Belgium?
Belgium.
I didn't know.
Belgium is a tiny little country conquering Congo, a huge country in Africa. So, so that's the irony. That's that these people are using the abolition of slavery, which they have done more than any other country, any other continent in the world. I mean, it's true that Africans had slaves, but never at the level of slavery Europeans reached. They had just abolished that, and they used slavery itself, humanism as as an excuse and a justification, right? They call the white man's burden. They would say, I'm making a sacrifice. That could be comfortable here at home, a rich country, and I am going to a primitive country where there's all sorts of uncomfortable situations, and these primitive people don't understand that I'm here to help them, and they rebel against me. So it's an ungrateful labor, and I'm being so selfless for helping them without asking anything in return. So that is part of the idea. It is the duty of civilized countries to conquer non-civilized country. So
it was back in those days. They didn't have the phrase "mind your business," did they?
This is also kind of like the way they brought in those missionaries as well. Yes. They would say, "Oh, you know, we're bringing you this, and you're, you know, you need to be saved."
Yes,
that's how they justified it.
So it's like a secular Christian evangelization, right?
Yeah.
Still, you still had a few missionaries as well, even in this period, late 1800s, but not as much as in the 1500s.
True.
So instead, they would use.
I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say that in the 1500s, it wasn't like, "Oh, we're saving you." The 1500s, like, "You better do this or you die."
Yeah, absolutely. And before dying, they baptize you. Yeah.
Riestra, when and how was it that United States implemented the colonialism or imperialism, however you want to say it or think about it, on the island?
Okay, this is interesting. I want to finish what I was.
No, it's not interesting. It's aggravating.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I'm shaking.
No, this is awful. But there was two more ideas I wanted to say before we go to the U.S.
Please.
One is another thing that was used to justify imperialism was science, perverted science, pseudoscience. Yeah. Just like religion was used in the past, they try to use whatever had authority and everyone valued. And science has a lot of authority and people value science. So you have a scientific racism in the late 1800s. The United States had a wave of anti-racism right after its independence. The South refused to abolish slavery, but ideologically they were more in defensive, right? Then they found an offensive by having this scientific racism, this social Darwinism, in which they would measure the skull of different races to fabricate false proof that white people are more intelligent or white people are more evolved than black people.
Pretty much what Leonardo DiCaprio did in Django with the skull at the.
Exactly.
That is completely.
Same thing that went through my head.
Yeah.
Okay. Same thing.
That is historical, and Hitler used that too.
Right.
Hitler used it a little bit later by measuring the noses of the Jews and things like that, and they would have this false statistic that was completely pseudoscience, but people would believe it as saying, well, if science is proving it, I think it's a fact then some races are superior than the other, you know. They would say, no, we're not going to enslave them. No, we're done with that, but we're not going to treat them equally. That's part of the ideology. And the other thing I think it's interesting is that this age of imperialism, one of the confusing things about it, that imperialism is linked to the word empire, right? Mm-hmm. And empire is not only a country that conquers other countries, it's also a country that has an emperor and therefore a monarchy, right? Correct. And that's the classical definition, right? An empire. And that's why it's difficult for some people to see it in the United States. When I was younger, I didn't understand it. When I was in high school, they would say the United States is an empire. Is the empire would say it's obviously not an empire. We have the U.S. president. There's elections. It's democracy. How can you call it an empire if there's no emperor? If you can say it is
one
abusive.
Guy calling the shot.
Yeah.
At least that's how Helena Valentin explained it to me.
Yeah.
It's like they're an empire because there's still one guy doing the shots. Truman, Roosevelt, Reagan. it's still one guy under, that has us under their boot.
Definitely. So it's also defined. Adding to that is the fact that the United States participates with all this trend. By the time the late 1800s, early 1900s, it's the same time the United States takes over Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines. It's also the time they take over the Panama Canal. It's also the time they buy the Virgin Islands from from Denmark, for example. So the United States and was participating in this phenomenon. And the other thing I would like to say, economic imperialism was already happening back then, which is not only I conquer you, is that I control your government and your people without necessarily having my troops visibly taking over. So England.
So it's not the same thing?
That's economic imperialism.
Okay.
So the United States was already doing that in the 1800s, infiltrating in governments. For example, Mexico is celebrating now its 200th anniversary of independence. 1821 was their independence. And I am surprised to learn recently that there were coups going on in Mexico in the 1820s and 1830s in which the American ambassador in Mexico was involved, trying to, behind the scenes, overthrow presidents and put presidents that favored U.S. policies. So that is not your obvious open classical imperialism, but it is economic imperialism in which a stronger country intervenes in the politics of another country in order to secure the economic.
Is that what Francis Riggs was doing in Nicaragua?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm going to show you a timeline I made. I hope it's useful.
Go teachers.
We can't help ourselves, right?
No, we can. It's innate in us.
Let me find it here. Okay. Let me see if I can. Okay, share screen. Okay.
We should be right over here.
Okay. Share. Can you see this?
Here we go. Yes.
Yes. We can see your desktop.
Perfect. Well, check this out. This is the classical colonialism we were talking at the beginning. Spain conquering all of this. Brazil conquering, Portugal conquering Brazil. France and Great Britain conquering this, right? The classical imperialism from the 1500s to the 1800s. And Africa was basically free, right? And these countries accomplished their independence by the 1820s. All of this is free except for Cuba and Puerto Rico. And then in the late 1800s, there's a fever of imperialism. Look at Africa completely conquered. All this is French. All this is British. Only Ethiopia remained independent. That's why the Rastafarians in Jamaica admired the last emperor of Ethiopia so much that they thought he was the incarnation of God. Right? Exactly.
Yes.
He was exactly, because he was the only Black leader in the world other than Haiti, right? But Haiti was being abused by other countries. Ethiopia was successfully progressing as a country. And look at India. India might be the most outrageous example of imperialism, because India is a highly civilized subcontinent. And it's conquered by this thing here, Britain. That's a tiny island.
Wow. Yeah.
So India had gunpowder. India had advanced math and science and everything. India was one of the most civilized. It's probably the most civilized country to be conquered under imperialism, I would say.
So what did they use? Economics?
Yes, and internal fighting. They made Muslims and Hindus fight each other in order to slowly get a grip of of the subcontinent.
The
and
division.
Yes, the division, absolutely. In fact, it was so efficient that today India broke in two. Pakistan is a Muslim India,
And Bangladesh.
and Bangladesh, absolutely Muslim India, and the rest is the Hindu India, right? And this thing here, this is Congo by Belgium over here, which is outrageous, right? And
you can even see it from here. It's just,
yeah.
I'm like,
Where's that?
where is it? Yes. Holy crap.
And China was not conquered by anyone because it was impossible to conquer China, but China was humiliated and interfered by the British, by the French, by the Russians, and they invited the United States to practice their imperialism in China in the late 1800s as well. So China had huge chunks of China in which European countries, Western countries, control the finance completely. And this is a very good example of economic imperialism, not conquering because it's just not worth sending troops there. The cost would be too much, but they managed to find a way to make it profitable economically. And this is what I wanted to show you about U.S. imperialism. And this is, I still can't get over it. We all know Puerto Rico became a U.S. colony since 1898. It is more dissimulated now because now the president, the governor is elected by the people, right? So this is why I made it different from before 1940.
I'm glad you said that. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's elected by the people.
Yes, since 1948, but there's still many people that consider the Puerto Rico a colony, right? The U.S. Virgin Islands, the same thing. They allowed the people of Virgin Islands to choose their president in the 1970s, so that's super late. Now, what most people don't know is that these three countries, which were never officially U.S. colonies, were de facto colonies because they were occupied by the United States for a long time. Nicaragua is just mind-blowing. From 1912 to 1933, Nicaragua was militarily occupied by the United States.
So that's what de facto means? It means,
yes.
Okay, that it was occupied by military.
De facto means that it's not official, but in practice it is.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't a colony in the sense that it was not a territory. It was incorporated, unincorporated. Occupation means it's like a euphemism because when you say occupation, you're saying, hey, no. You're one country, I'm another country. You don't cease to exist. I'm not incorporating you to. It's only a short-term thing, right? And as you can see, it's nothing short-term. It's like 20 years, right? So occupation is a way to say my military is going to take over you for a provisional time, for a short time, because this is an emergency. So we have no desire to take over.
That was Nicaragua until what year?
Until 1933. So this is where
wasn't the family, hold on. The Somoza family?
Yes.
Were absolutely. Dictators. So United States put a dictator and made sure a dictator was in power all that time?
Absolutely. And Nicaragua is the only country in Latin America that can truly say that they made a full-fledged war against the United States. Mm-hmm. They had for independence, I would say. Mexico fought a war against the United States, to be fair. But the United States was not occupying Mexico for 20 years. And in the case of Nicaragua, you have the leader of Sandino, who led the Sandinista army to fight the United States in 1933 until Sandino was captured and killed. And two of those military commanders that were there were then sent to Puerto Rico, which was
Riggs being one of them?
And Bantam Winship.
And Winship, both of them.
Yeah. At least one of them. I always wanted to check, double check, but at least one of them was. And Dominican Republic and Haiti as well. No one talks about Haiti being occupied by the United States from 1915 to 1934. That's a hell long of time, right? It's occupation means American troops control everything.
almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Let me just throw this out real quick for those who are watching, just to sum this one little part down real quick, just to prick you with the pen a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Riggs and Winship helping the United States keep a dictator in power, the whole family for 42 years in Nicaragua, and then decide, oh, you know what? Let's make these guys governor and send them to Puerto Rico. That's a really bad idea, but yet it's an idea that's now part of history. Continue. I just wanted to throw that in there.
And the other side of the island, which was Dominican Republic, was also occupied by U.S. troops in 1916 to 1924. So both sides of the islands, because these two countries share an island, so both sides were occupied by the United States, and this is almost 10 years. And in the case of Dominican Republic, it blows my mind because they did it so obvious that they remove the figure of the president, which is scandalous, because in this two other cases, in Nicaragua and in Haiti, they kept a local president for the sake of keeping an impression that the people are still in control of their own country. But in the case of the Dominican Republic, you see the list of the presidents of Dominican Republic, and you see this almost 8-year period in which there's, instead of Dominican presidents, you have American generals living as governors in Dominican Republic. So that is something people have forgotten. We know.
How long did Puerto Rico go through that?
Until 1948, 50 years.
Until Marin?
Until Luis Muñoz Marin, yeah. 50
Which was
years.
Still under debate that he was pretty much put in there by the Americans anyway.
Definitely.
So
Americans
technically,
yeah.
we've only had a governor in Puerto Rico, a Puerto Rican governor in Puerto Rico, for just 3 generations.
Yeah.
For just 3 generations, because my grandmother was born in 41. So give or take, it's only been 3 generations that we've had a Puerto Rican governor. Think about that.
Yeah.
That sounds like what? Yeah.
Yeah, it's when my grandmother is 98, and when I counted the governors of Puerto Rico, she saw through her life, half of them were American appointed. So that is that's
so your grandma's 98, our grandma is 94. Yeah. She's seen that.
Yeah, it's impressive, right?
That is. It's like we can have a conversation with our grandmothers, right?
Absolutely.
About that point in history, and still be able to kind of like, hey, it's a huge impact. It's a huge change in the way that we live today in the island, right? But it's still, and right now.
Is it? That's what I'm waiting to get at. I'm shaking. Is it really different? Okay, let's finish up with this to get into that, because I don't really see much of a difference there.
Well, let's see these 2 others that are also colonialism in disguise. There's many ways you can disguise colonialism. In the case of Cuba had a war of independence against Spain before the Spanish-American War. So the United States could not simply take over Cuba and say you're a colony, because they needed to tell the world that they were there to support the Cubans in their war of independence against Spain back in 1898. So if they made Cuba a colony, no one will believe in the United States ever again. So they would say, we're going to help you gain independence from Spain, and afterwards you're going to be a free independent country, because that's what your war is about. But as soon as Spain was defeated in 1898, the United States kept Cuba for the period Cuba would take to make a constitution. And Cubans were already saying, this is fishy. We can make a constitution on our own. And the United States said, we're going to hang out here for a while until you finish your constitution, then we leave. When Cuba finished its constitution in 1902, the United States says, we need to approve the Constitution. When have you
It
heard?
4 years to make a constitution.
Apparently, yes.
Why? I mean, because I don't know anything about lawmaking or anything like that. Is that normal? 4 freaking years?
Well, it can take a long time. 4 years is definitely a long time, but it can take one. I've seen countries take 1 year, 2 years, because it's a long debate. Maybe it was because of the aftershocks of the war. I would have to see why it took so long. But even after they made the Constitution, the United States said, I need to approve it, which contradicts the idea of independence. If you're independent, you don't need to ask permission to have any other country to approve your Constitution. The Constitution needs to be approved by the people of your country, not by any other country. But anyway, the Constitution was approved with a condition that they added an amendment called the Platt Amendment. And the Platt Amendment it would tell the United States that they have the right to invade Cuba whenever it was necessary, whenever the United States thought necessary. So imagine a country that has a constitution in which its first amendment is, I'm okay with having another country invade me. So that is a very nasty, covert imperialism until the 1930s, in which it was abolished, the Platt Amendment. So until the 1930s,
abolished. O sea, they actually made it legal. They actually put it in there.
They removed the Platt Amendment.
Yeah, but it actually had to be.
But under definition, to remove it, it must mean it was in there to begin with. So they actually,
yes, it was approved in 1903 until I can't see it here, but it's in 1930 something, like 34. And this is the time it was implemented in 1906 and 1909. The governor, there's an American governor there. There's no president in Cuba. And between 1917 and 1924, again, the United States invades Cuba legally, absolutely legally, because they made a legal constitution that allows the United States to do that without any legal problems. So it is like incredibly abusive. That ended in the 1930s still, but the United States had other ways to control Cuba, right? They still have Guantanamo to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Panama, they still have the Panama Zone Canal until the 70s. Oh, wait, I haven't touched the Panama yet. Anyway, that's the case of Cuba. Cuba still has one part of Cuba that's under U.S. control, which is Guantanamo. The case of Panama is very crazy too, because Panama was part of Colombia, and there was a small independence movement in Panama of Panameños that wanted to move away from Colombia, and the United States took advantage of that and promised Panama to help the Panameños break away from Colombia in exchange for Panameños to allow the United States to make a canal there. And they kept the canal with an area called the Canal Zone until the 1970s. So there was a huge chunk of Panama that was completely controlled by the Americans. And until the year 1998 or 99, the Panama Canal was under American control too. Let me show you one last. Yeah. Can you still see my?
We just lost it.
No, we just lost it right now.
I'm going to add one last slide. I want to share.
I am trying so hard not to start throwing vulgarities out there. Because some of this stuff is just like, whoo.
Now check this out. Look at the countries under U.S. occupation in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is most. This is the combination of everything I showed you in the timeline. So Cuba was under U.S. occupation, Dominican Republic under U.S. occupation, Haiti under U.S. occupation, Puerto Rico, Nicaragua, and Panama. And this is like the most extreme cases. Guatemala had countless of coups made by the U.S. So did Honduras, Salvador, Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia. So this is the most obvious cases in which you see American troops taking over a country, right? But there's other ways, like I'm going to show you another one. I said it was the last one, but I think can be useful too.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's all useful.
There's lots of ways we can sneak in there.
Check this one out. This is a timeline I made for the 20th century Central America. Let's see Honduras. These are coups made by the United States. This is different moments in which the United States supports the overthrow of a president, okay, and make one that is convenient for them, you see. And there's two major companies, which is United Fruit Company and this other one.
Can I ask a quick question? Do they support going into a place, or do they plan it and design it?
Who?
The United States.
Well, this is where
you're already gonna do this. Let me help you out, or maybe you should do this.
Both,
like the little imp with the fork.
Both.
I feel like we're feeling the fire.
In both cases,
both
have occurred. Both, you have both scenarios happening. Yes.
Okay.
And it's tricky because it's not only the United States, the government. Sometimes there are companies in Central America, United Fruit Company, and other like 3 or 4 companies were so powerful that their budgets were superior than the budget of the entire country. And they made a terrible decision of allowing those companies to take over the infrastructure, for example, which was a favor. These countries were given a favor, apparently, right? An apparent favor of having roads be made, railroads be made, telegraphs, telephones all across the country, but it's made by this company that wants to make the country easier to transport for transportation for their own benefit, right? And then
does Domino Sugar fall under that?
Yeah, absolutely. Domino Sugar was made by the first civilian governor of Puerto Rico. Yes. So you have these companies sometimes raging wars among themselves. Sometimes you have 2 presidents that respond to 2 different U.S. companies, 2 Honduras presidents that fight against each other because it's competing companies. So Honduras is the case of the most successful U.S. infiltration of the country's economy, right? Then you have resistance, like in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, you have the occupation, which was much more brutal. This is military, not only economic. You have the war against the American occupation, but then you have the Somoza family ruling for a long, long time. The same Somoza that were already in power under U.S. occupation. These rule until the 1970s. In 1979, there's a new Sandinista army that has a civil war. More or less at the same time, El Salvador, and at the same time as Guatemala. These 3 countries have very, very bloody civil wars, especially in the 80s, although they've begun earlier in the 60s in the case of Guatemala, which are people fighting against American supported military dictators. And they are so violent that in the Guatemalan Civil War, for example, you have the horrendous Mayan genocide. They killed 200,000 Mayan natives in Guatemala by this U.S.-supported government. So it is heartbreaking. So when you see how poor Central America is, the United States has a lot to do with that. In Guatemala, there was a company that had like 40% of all the land. When have you heard of one company having 40% of all the land?
A company, not. We're not talking about the its own government. We're talking about a business owning 40%, and that's unfortunately something that I'm terrified about in Puerto Rico because it looks like the whole island is up for sale.
It is economic imperialism. There's many manifestations of that. So do you see you can hide it in many ways? You can hide it like you did in Honduras, in which you have no wars. Or you can use brutal dictators like in Nicaragua and obvious occupations, or you can do more covert coup. There's so many, unfortunately, creative ways to do it. In the case of Guatemala in the
Kind of
40s,
like what was going on in Chiapas, right? A few decades
exactly.
ago, also.
Yeah, in Mexico, yes,
Yes.
definitely, yes, which borders Guatemala. This dude, Arevalo, ended a dictatorship by this guy who ruled all the 30s and half of the 40s. He won the elections of 1944 democratically. There's a democratic revolution, and he started taking away lands from those companies, the land the companies were not using. For example, these companies had so much land that they did not only have land they used, they had land they didn't use in order to prevent other companies from using that land to compete with them. So it was just obscene. So Arevalo,
a case of if I can't have it, you can't have it.
absolutely, right. Yeah. It's disgusting. Arevalo started taking land from these companies, actually paying them. So he was being tactical. He would pay these companies, confiscate their land, force them to give them away, give them some money in return, especially beginning with the land they were not using. Mm-hmm. Then he was succeeded by Arbenz, who was not a communist, who had socialist friends and some communist friends, but he was not a radical socialist. He had some left-leaning ideas. But the United States accused him of being a communist and being supported by the Soviet Union, which was not true. The Soviet Union had very little connections to Guatemala, and the United States made a very strong intervention, and they made a coup in 1954. They overthrew Arbenz, who was democratically elected by the people, and established a military rule that lasted until the Civil War ended in the until the 1990s, basically. So this is extreme. Guatemala is very extreme.
Anything we could do to communist everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Any justify the means.
So that's basic, and then that word just is it's like a trigger word, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a communist, and people don't even know what it means, and but it's bad because that was the propaganda, no.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's very easy at the time for the bigger entities to turn public image against these smaller righteous groups.
Mm-hmm.
Can we say that media was actually the strongest weapon that any empire has had? Where at least in situations like that, because they can't just go into war without, turning the opinion into, we need to go in and do this. No matter, I mean, there's but so much money that can go around. So it seems to me like maybe the media that they use, whatever they had at the time to move their propaganda, was one of the strongest weapons that they had.
Yeah, definitely.
Because like now, where there's a lot more conscious. I would like to say there's a lot more conscious people, but in reality, it's just that the facts are easier to see. I don't think the general public's IQ has gone up very much lately. We're trying to change
something
that.
That's interesting. Talking about what you're saying is that I've listened because you guys know I'm a nerd. I'm always listening to public radio stations and whatnot, and I was listening to a report about the journalists right now are leaving journalism because they are not being utilized. They don't see what's happening. People are not seeing what's happening because of what we're using right now, this digital platform. Newspapers used to be our fact check. If it's in the paper, we got to see. And you did have journalists that would stretch the truth in order to get the paper to sell, sure. But you also had those serious journalists that's like, no, we looked into it. We saw this. What they said here is false. And then you would have what we call the retraction. Other people would come in and say, you're right, this was false. And we understood. So you don't have those. We have those internet sleuths now, for example, as an example, where they actually fact check and they make sure that they're sleuth approved, which are these people who say, yeah, there is a direct connection. That story is true. So you have some way, but you also have other people that are fact checking. So Here's
Because there's
the
a lot
point.
of fake news out there.
Exactly,
So that's
that
nothing.
word
Yeah,
being
that's
coined.
nothing
Fake
new.
news.
Because
Fake
remember,
news.
most of the pictures from El Masacre de Ponce, you had the cops looking up like they had like the nationalists had a sniper on the roof. There was no sniper. They dragged the bodies. You could see the line of blood where they dragged the bodies. Okay, this will make a good picture. Let's all stand this way.
Yeah.
So it's. Did you know about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, we did. Oh, at least I knew. I don't know if you knew about. She's not sure about what the Masacre de Ponce. That's another story.
Oh yeah, that's a whole episode. I mean, I guess in the timeline we can touch on it real quick, like 2 or 3 minutes. But in the last, we have at most a half hour left. Riestra, how are we seeing the imperialism now?
Okay. I think that there's economic imperialism happening in Puerto Rico, happening in all Latin America. Latin America has developed a reaction to that. You have entire governments and parties that are constantly referring to that and saying we don't want that to happen again, because during the Cold War, what you just mentioned, that communism was used like the trigger word to justify dictators in Latin America, which is kind of weird, because sometimes you hear people from the United States saying that Latin America is a failure because there's so many coups, there's so many revolutions, and there's so many dictators. But many of the dictators were placed by the United States. Many of the coups were made by the United States, and many of the civil wars are sponsored by the United States, right? So it's the great irony, So in Latin America, there's a fight against that, and sometimes it's more efficient than other times. So that's happening there. I would say that we have to remember that imperialism will always update itself in order to find a way so it doesn't feel like imperialism. No, we're not colonizing like before. And what blows my mind is something that's very delicate, because whenever we talk about this topic, it might sound for some people that we're being disrespectful for the veterans. And the narrative is so well constructed. In the United States, you have 2 holidays for the military, right? It's
Veterans Day, Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Memorial Day.
Yeah. And you have monuments everywhere. We have a very militarized culture, making us feel that is one of our most important sources of pride. And these people, that's nationalism is very linked to that in the United States, more than in other countries. And they put you in a hot spot, because the moment you criticize these wars in which people we know participated, it feels like you're saying that you fought for nothing. You fought for something. You're devoid of any righteousness in your war.
It's un-American.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And
it's very subtle.
What you would hear here. It's un-American for you to say something like that.
And that's subtle.
For the Vietnam War is what Mr. Bolt said. Yeah, definitely.
Because there's freedom of speech. They're not going to say, you can't say that. Yeah, you can, but they're going to pressure you subtly, saying, nah, that's un-American, that's a disrespect. And you see a politician saying, he disrespected our veterans, and people are like, oh no, this politician is over. Take back what you said, because what you said is an insult to our veterans, or to the people that died serving. And
we can never in good conscience say that, because every nationalist loves Albizu Campo. We idolize Albizu Campo, and Albizu Campo was an airman.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then we have Afghanistan. I just can't believe 20 years that have passed. I was in 11th grade when 9/11 had happened. And now I'm a teacher of high school. And I'm like, how do I begin telling my students this story? Because they're born in 2003 or 2004.
They don't understand why we're talking about it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I got in trouble with a job I had an after school program, and the day after 9/11, I grabbed a whole bunch of newspapers and I was going to sit down with my kids and just talk about it. What do you think? How do you feel? And yeah, I almost got fired. I'm going to say with AmeriCorps Vista, I said it. They almost fired me because they didn't want me to share any of that with the kids.
But it wasn't, to be fair, it wasn't AmeriCorps Vista. It was the Puerto Rican that was focused on taking care of that program, thinking it was un-American, and that was the one that.
Well, I'm a true nationalist, and I did it anyway.
Of course.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to throw that in there.
I got 2 months.
So in the year 2001, the United States made a war that apparently felt justified for many people. I mean, it was so shocking to see 9/11. Those 2 towers falling to smithereens, something we only see in movies, you know? So suddenly it felt like it was a defensive. You attack me, I'm going to attack you back. I'm going to find whoever attacked the U.S. So it did not seem
It
as
almost
easy.
felt like everybody was attacked.
Yeah. And everyone
I was attacked because I have knowledge of self through the Nation of Gods and Earth, the 5 Percenters, which is a branch off of Islam. And I was attacked, not physically, because just by looking at me, you know better. But yeah, I had to deal with a lot. Since Puerto Rico is so Catholic and Christian based, they were attacking everybody. If you didn't have at least in Aguadilla area, if you didn't have a rosary on, if you weren't doing this every 3 seconds, they were on you. It was, I remember that. I'm sorry, continue.
2001, I used to compare it to Iraq because the war in Iraq, for many people, now looking back, felt like the bad war and Afghanistan the good war. Iraq was the bad war because there was no weapon of mass destruction. It was not discovered. The 2 premises were false. The other premises was that Saddam Hussein had links to Al-Qaeda, which was also false. So some people would say the big mistake was to invade Iraq. Many people say that in both parties. Trump, being a Republican, would say it was a mistake to go to Iraq. And Obama would say the same thing. Obama voted against going to Iraq, and Hillary voted in favor. So Iraq, it was easier to say Iraq was a mistake. Afghanistan was a good idea. And the reason Afghanistan went wrong was that because we invaded Iraq, our troops got spread too thinly. And had we not done the mistake of Iraq, the mission in Afghanistan would have been a success. But after seeing what happened now, it's like, wow, they were both bad wars. It was not that Iraq was the good war, Afghanistan was.
Every war is bad.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it was us. Hi, we're back.
Yeah, every war is bad.
So think about this. 20 years, that's longer than Vietnam. I just can't believe the similarities between Afghanistan and Vietnam seem so. It was like a cliche when people would say, you know what, this is going to be like Afghanistan, like Vietnam all over again. I used to think that was lazy. That would say, come on, you're just going to compare with Vietnam because it's the most famous war recently we had. It's different. That's what I would think in the past. I thought it was like a cliche to compare everything to Afghanistan, like everyone compares any dictator to Hitler, you know?
Right.
But the same thing happened. Very long war. They couldn't win. They decided to leave when they realized they can't win. And the enemy they were fighting took power right after the Americans left. It's a complete defeat. The United States lost Vietnam. They lost Vietnam because the communists took over the capital as soon as the Americans left. And the same thing happened here. 20 years to leave in power the same guy you said you were going to remove.
I mean, to their credit, at least they were able to take over as soon as the Americans left, or as soon as their invaders left. Our invaders left, which was Spain originally, and we were not able to take over. Piggybacking on the subject of war, if I'm not mistaken, the Jones Act was made for the First World War.
Yes.
To avoid the U-boats either taking down any merchant ships or anything being transported within the merchant ships into the native land of the U.S., which is why the Jones Act, nothing's going to get into Puerto Rico, which is so close to us and could do damage to us without us checking it. The First World War is over. It's gone. It's been, what, 80 years, something like that? Give or take a decade or two?
Been a while.
The fact that we're still under the Jones Act in Puerto Rico, is that not a symbolism of imperialism? Is that not a symbol of imperialism?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
What else can we see? I mean, we haven't been able to take the sugarcane back.
No. I think the most shocking one, I'm going to give you another country as well so we can compare. In the United States, the most obvious imperialism is Afghanistan and Iraq. Why doesn't it feel like imperialism? Because we're fighting very bad people. That's the idea. That's the narrative, is the terrorists are so evil. They do everything you find nasty. They do it, So it's like the perfect
communist to terrorist.
Absolutely. Okay. Plus, you add the other thing that is, we don't want to conquer. We won't conquer. We're just we're gonna take over, change the government, and then leave. That's the idea.
Did we lose Riestra?
No, we can hear you.
Yeah, we're good over here. It's over there, Sandy and Brittany.
Okay.
We can hear you perfectly, and we can see you perfectly well.
Okay, we kind of lost you guys for a second. It's us. Sorry.
No, we got you.
So we have to realize always that the next imperialism that comes in the next years is going to make us at first feel that it's not imperialism. It won't have some of the traits it currently has. And also that we're going to say that we're not there to stay. The idea of Afghanistan was not to conquer Afghanistan. They didn't want to make Afghanistan a territory. They want to remove the Taliban, create a democratic Afghanistan, democracy, right? A crusade for democracy. It used to be civilization. Before that, Christianity. They would say it's going to be awful. We might kill a few civilians on the way. That's collateral damage. But in the end, democracy will be so good, and that's forever, long term. They will enjoy democracy forever and ever. Then in this, probably we save more lives with democracy than the lives that we are going to kill during the brief period it takes to overthrow whoever's in charge in those countries that are under terrible dictators or how do you say, terrorists, right? So that's the case of Afghanistan, which still blows my mind. I did not know it was going to be this spectacular in the sad, bad sense. It was spectacular, but in a very sad, the way the Afghans took over, it's like, it's so humiliating for the United States, but also like the mask saying it was me, imperialism all along, doing the same, right? Other countries are doing it too. China, for example, is doing imperialism, economic imperialism, and it's questionable. However, it's weird when the United States tells China, hey, cut it out. What you're doing is bad. It's like, maybe it's good to have two people competing for imperialism. So they check each other out, and they try to balance each other.
Accountable.
Yeah, exactly. In a way,
because China's doing it in Africa. What didn't they just build a railroad somewhere in Africa to say, hey, we just want to help you out? And I'm like,
absolutely,
that doesn't sound right. That doesn't make any kind of sense to me. So, and these poor people were happy because they had a means of transport, and they had, and I'm like, that eso me huele mal. It doesn't feel right.
Absolutely. And they're doing it. China is under economic imperialism of, Africa is under economic imperialism of China. It's a wonderful example. Well, it's a sad example, right? But it's a very good example.
But it's a good example of saying, to prove.
All of this sounds eerily familiar to the 5 to 10 years before and after Luis Muñoz Marín in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything from the train to this, I'm just helping you out temporarily, just to make sure that this guy doesn't make bad decisions. It's just cyclical.
But part of the contract is that if you fail to pay China back, China takes over whatever is being built. If it's a port,
well,
exactly.
isn't I don't want to say U.S. because it's privately owned, but aren't those privately owned entities doing the same thing with like the toll booths, the freeways, the highways in Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
Doesn't belong to the government.
Mm-hmm.
It belongs like literally to a person.
Mm-hmm. To a company, yeah, definitely. So those are many ways imperialism can transform itself. Maybe we need a new name, neo-imperialism, but it's always tricky because a new name should not be used to disguise it more. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's important. If the new name helps us understand, identify the new traits, so we can see how bad it is, then the new name will be welcome. But if the future imperialism is only economic, and if the future imperialism is only, it does not use boots on the ground and everything, we still have to be careful because it's very clever ways to take over and advance, right? Syria is a very, very sad case because it's the worst proxy war right now. You have Russia supporting one group, the United States supporting the other, and yeah, it's awful, and it's the longest war of the. Well,
I think the worst part about that is Russia will back one person up, United States will back the other side up, but it's these guys in the middle that are actually taking all the losses.
Absolutely, yeah. Something similar happened to Central America because both the Soviet Union and the United States were supplying the rivaling factions in Central America for their own geopolitical expansion, and that's the sad thing about these things,
So nowadays in 2021, what's the biggest reason why the U.S. would still have us under that grasp?
Puerto Rico.
Yeah, it can't be. I want to say it's money, but first of all, they devalued the dollar in Puerto Rico literally from one day to the next. What, by 60%?
Yeah.
A dollar it wasn't worth a dollar. It was worth 40 cents, literally from night to morning.
Yeah. The Spanish peso and the American dollar were almost equal, and they
I'm
made
a
it.
firm believer that Puerto Rico has enough resources as far as the people, the talent, the hands to work to actually build some type of a market and commerce to pay back whatever it is that the US feels that we owe, but we can't do it if we got to pay you money in order to sell something to them.
Yeah.
Which is going back to the Jones Act.
Yeah.
So do you see any possibility of that just eventually getting eliminated? Like, look, we apologize for imperialism. Here, you can make your own money.
Yeah, there is. It's complicated.
Brittany's like, hell no, that's not happening.
It's complicated because another thing that happened since the 70s is that taking advantage of the unemployment in Puerto Rico, they start making federal money for food. How do you say that in
the food stamps?
The food stamps, for example, and they start and they start doing things like that. Federal welfare that is good because it prevents the worst, which is starvation, right? Which was happening in the 70s. There's famous reports of people actually starving in the 70s when people thought that was something of the past in Puerto Rico. But the thing is that politicians made a clever way, instead of making that short term, instead of helping people get jobs, they create this dependency. The greatest problem Puerto Rico has now is dependency. Many people are unemployed and they depend on federal money. And also, only 10% of what we consume is produced here. 90% of everything we consume is exported. We have destroyed agriculture in Puerto Rico. So dependency is enormous. And the irony right now is that the reason Puerto Rico is not independent is because Puerto Ricans don't want independence right now. Puerto Ricans, the pro-independence movement in Puerto Rico is a minority. There's a bigger movement of Puerto Ricans that kind of want Puerto Rico to be its own self-governing entity thing. They don't want to say the word independence because some Puerto Ricans think it equals poverty or communism or starvation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they know that they want a government of Puerto Ricans for Puerto Ricans. That type of people is still in the Commonwealth because of the fear of economic instability, you know. And the other thing is, which is also irony, this might be the moment that is easiest for the United States to give Puerto Rico independence. After the Cold War ended in 1991, and after, well, the United States is closing down military bases everywhere. They eliminated Panama. Now it's back in the hands of the Panameñans. They let go of Vieques. So we have aircraft carriers. We have satellites and missiles. So this is the first time in the 500 years of colonialism that Puerto Rico's military strategic importance is not as high as it used to be.
As significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Navy is no longer lobbying to keep Puerto Rico as a territory. So it's easier now than ever before to convince American politicians to give us independence. But the problem is that the majority of Puerto Ricans
don't want to let it go. They got used to it.
Convince the people first.
Yeah. And that's why we're in this situation. Independence is not happening because Puerto Ricans don't want it. Statehood is not happening because the United States doesn't want statehood for Puerto Rico. So we're stuck where we are for a while.
And I understand how a lot of people are afraid of. I mean, that's a whole different episode or a whole different podcast, you know, on the fear of losing our identity as Puerto Ricans if we become a state. You know, yeah, you'll hear proud New Yorker, proud Texan, but proud Puerto Rican, it just holds so much more weight.
Yeah.
Like Mon Rivera said, Boricua está en la luna. Boricua even in the moon. Guys, we just reached the end of our time. My panelists, don't hang up yet. I'm going to check you in the studio. Everybody who's watching us, we are going to do a follow-up on this. This was just too intense. We can keep going deeper and deeper. Riestra, thank you. Brittany, Sandy, thank you. Everybody out there watching us. I hope this helped. I hope this aggravated you as much as it aggravated me. Which means you were paying attention and we all enjoyed. Have a great night. This was Shoot the Shh with Joey Zaza. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.